Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We're going to get started with today's webinar, Using Feedback to Inform What's Next. First, right off the bat, I want to quickly go over how to ask questions. You'll see in the GoToWebinar panel, there is a section called Questions. Feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar, and I will relay them to today's speakers as the opportunity presents. And if we don't have time to get to all the questions during the webinar, there will be more time at the end for Q&A. Let's practice using the questions functionality real quick by letting me know where you are dialing in from. Internet Creations has two headquarters, one in New Jersey, Hamilton, and one also in Dallas, Texas. I'm working remotely today from just 10 minutes outside of Princeton. And let's see, we have people from Philadelphia, California, a couple other ones, New Jersey. I know we have at least one person from overseas today. We'll get into that. Awesome. So let's have a look at today's agenda. First off, we'll have an introduction on why feedback matters and why feedback matters right now during these uncertain times. Then today's speakers will talk about feedback for 3 different areas of business, including customer service, employee productivity, and innovation. And finally, to wrap things up, the speakers will share their best tips on getting meaningful insights that are actionable. And with that, Peter, I'd like to hand it off to you if you could introduce yourself to everyone.
Hey, thanks so much, Anthony. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Peter Camille, a product manager here at Internet Creations. And throughout my career, I've designed and developed mobile applications, high frequency day trading models, consumer products, and cloud-based services. And I've learned the valuable lesson that collecting actionable feedback is the best way to get the pulse of customers, validate assumptions, and make data-driven decisions. And now as the product manager for Simple Survey, I'm delighted to be able to help others collect valuable feedback and gain the meaningful insights needed that lead to better decisions. So as Anthony mentioned, today I'll be leading a fireside chat on the importance and impact feedback has on customer satisfaction, employee well-being and productivity, and how it drives innovation throughout your organization. I'm very fortunate today to be joined by Daniel Mitchell, who's the founder and director of Lifeline IT, and he's going to share his real-life experience and insights. Daniel has a background in consulting for accounting practices and fashion manufacturing, and 19 years ago, he founded Lifeline IT Solutions. And back in May of this year, Lifeline became an Internet Creations customer and started using Simple Survey to capture feedback, so no one better to have on this call than Daniel. And I did want to point out, though, that although Daniel is joining us from across the pond in the United Kingdom, just north of London, and I'm in New Jersey, I wanted to assure everyone that our profiles are practicing strict social distancing, and we went one step further to protect ourselves, and we're even wearing masks. So without any further ado, Daniel, can you please tell us a little more about yourself and a little bit about Lifeline IT?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks so much, Peter, and thank you, Anthony, as well. Really glad to be joining you this evening over here, just outside London. I founded Lifeline IT quite a lot of years ago, and we have a very broad range of different customers. Quite a lot, as you mentioned, within accountancy and within fashion and retail and fashion manufacture. But also everything from sandwich manufacturers to financial advisors, all sorts of different businesses. From small businesses of 2 or 3 people up to some clients with a couple of 100 plus and everything in between. We provide all of the IT services for most of our clients. Some will have a small internal team or 1 or 2 people responsible for IT, but generally speaking, they will outsource all of their IT function to us. So understanding how they feel about the technology, understanding how they feel about the service that we're delivering is really, really key. We're unusual in that we don't tie any clients into contracts at all. So they're free to leave at any moment. Fortunately, we have great client retention. So I guess we're doing something right somewhere. And listening to them and understanding what their needs are is really, really important, and I think key to that.
That's awesome, Daniel. Always great. Nothing speaks louder to client success than great retention, and not having to be locked into contracts is important. So, moving into, why feedback is important, one of the things that impressed me when I looked at your LinkedIn profile is you state how, getting to know my clients' businesses really well is a key part of the process. So can you take some time to expand upon this and, and tell us why feedback is really important to you?
Yeah. So because clients are outsourcing all of their IT to us, we almost become part of their team. And to be part of their team, we need to really understand so that we can get that loyalty that's so key for us, so that we can get that trust that's so key for us. And because things are moving fast, and because IT solutions are expected quickly, we need to know in real time how we're performing. I've got a team of about 30 people. And when we're looking after a large number of clients, and then an even larger number of users at those clients, to understand exactly when a problem is arising, or exactly when we're doing really well, and be able to repeat that behavior is absolutely key to us. We couldn't function without understanding how our clients feel about what it is that we're doing, and then, if necessary, change how we're behaving.
You raised some really good points about getting, direct and immediate feedback and the importance of getting it in real time. And I can certainly relate to that. Feedback, as I was mentioning earlier, is just such a critical part of being a product manager. After years of designing and building software, I trust my instincts and ability to put myself in a customer's shoes, but it's also really critical that I validate my assumptions and take a real data-driven approach when it comes to deciding, what new features should take priority and make it into our products here at Internet Creations. So, I really encourage our listeners to do the same. Trust your instincts, but verify your assumptions with data-driven feedback. And so, moving along, I wanted to touch upon the fact that we are all in very uncertain times right now. We're facing a global pandemic that has disrupted every aspect of our lives, our workplace, our home life, health, and global economy. And as this Harvard Business Review article points out, feedback is really more critical now than ever to understand what has changed and what's most important to customers, employees, and your business partners. So let's dive into it, discuss a little bit how feedback has changed the way companies approach feedback and why it is even more important right now. So, for example, at Internet Creations, we started using AI from Einstein's prediction builder in Salesforce to predict late payments. And this really helped us accurately forecast our cash flow and proactively reach out to customers to offer more flexible payment options. Daniel, can you give us some examples of how COVID-19 has changed your approach to collecting feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. I suspect over on this side of the water, it's a similar situation to much of the USA, as far as the fact that almost all of our clients are now working from home to a greater or lesser extent. And I think in any time of change, asking questions and understanding how it's impacting on our individual clients is really, really important. I think specifically the biggest change that I've noticed is that I don't have the casual chats with clients. I was typically spending maybe 3 days a week on site at my clients' offices, and it's those informal conversations, understanding what they're up to, and also how we're doing, and if there's any issues, you get to hear what's going on in the office environment because you're physically there. Obviously, that's not the case now, so we had to really step up what we're doing to understand in more detail what's happening in our clients' offices and how they feel about how we're delivering a changed nature of support, a changed support delivery for them. So rather than doing face-to-face work, and a lot of the time that my engineers would spend on client work was face-to-face in their office, is now dealing from their homes, helping out somebody who is working from their home. So really important to understand how they feel and how we're delivering that support effectively in this very changed environment. And by asking simple questions frequently, we get really good results that we're able to analyze and understand.
Those are some really good points. I used to, in a previous lifetime, be a management and IT consultant. And when you're sitting at, working from customers frequently, as I did, you'd hear those conversations in the background, or customers call you over and say, hey, we're having this problem or that, and we're running into these issues. And you lose that if you're not, spending time face to face with them. And they're not going to just jump on a 5-minute Zoom call to discuss those things with you. It's unlikely for those impromptu discussions and opportunities to present themselves. So it's really interesting how you've realized that as a consulting company, and put more emphasis on how you can collect that feedback from customers. So great examples. So, moving along, I wanted to talk about, how feedback is really, impacts 3 key areas of, customers, employees, and innovation. And starting with customers, the question really is, as Daniel was saying, how do you know if your customers are happy, especially if you're spending less physical time with them? With the increased competition and more choices available to customers, how do you know that you're delivering a great experience for customers? And so my question to you, Daniel, is, so how does Lifeline IT, measure customer satisfaction?
So I'll talk a little bit, Peter, about how what our process is to gather this piece of feedback. Every time we do anything for any client, we create a case. We're also Salesforce users, as you know, and we create a case in Salesforce. And that might be something typically which is generated by the client themselves, perhaps a problem they're having or a change they'd like implemented. Sometimes the case will be generated by one of my team, where they'll notice something, or there'll be something that arises from some maintenance work that they're doing. But everything for us starts with a case. And my team will work on a case, perhaps that will pass from one person to another person, but at some point we will say, right, we're closing this case. As soon as we close that case, an email will be sent to the client asking, how did we do? And that's what Simple Survey has enabled us to do, to be able to have that automated function for an email to go to the client and say, how did we do? They then get to rate our performance from 1 to 5 stars, and that gets written back into the case in Salesforce and allows me then to do all my spreadsheet magic and analysis magic and reports in Salesforce and dashboards, all the other things that I know we've talked about and we'll probably talk about a little bit more, Peter. But it allows me to see immediately how we're doing. We have a couple of triggers that then follow on from that. So generally speaking, our feedback scores are great, and it's lovely to be able to talk about that internally with the team. But occasionally we'll get some negative feedback, and if we get negative feedback, that triggers an email through to myself and my senior management team. It triggers an alert in a channel in Microsoft Teams that we use, where we can then track what we're doing about that negative feedback. And when we get negative feedback, for us, it's an opportunity to pick up the phone to that person and say, what happened? How did we do? How can we resolve this for you? How can we move forward? And that is utterly valuable. I'll pause there, Peter, but happy to go into a little bit more depth, but I think that's a quick overview of how we deal with feedback.
No, that's a great point of, of how to, capture that customer feedback. And you made me think of one thing, which is, not being afraid to get negative feedback. You mentioned that, hey, we're getting in general really good results, but it's those negative feedback that really, I think, presents those opportunities to do better. And that's how you improve. So you sort of want to embrace and encourage customers and give them that opportunity in that space to tell you when things aren't perfect, so that you can, adjust, react, and make things better. For ourselves at Internet Creations, Simple Survey was really born out of our own need to measure customer satisfaction. And we wanted to figure out a way to do that while getting higher response rates. So similar to you, we send out, one way that we use the tool is to send out surveys also after support cases closed. And we're happy to say also that we have an average customer satisfaction score of 9.65 out of 10. But there's always room for improvement. And if and when we do get a bad score, our product manager gets alerted immediately, and we can take action and mitigate those issues with customers. And it's all about being quick and responsive than letting things brew and fester. So great examples there.
Peter, we have a question about rating scales, and the question is, what is your opinion on using the 1 through 5 rating scale or the 1 through 10? And Daniel, I believe you mentioned that Lifeline uses a 1 through 5 rating scale. What made you decide to pick that rating scale?
That's a really good question, actually. So originally, we when we first started doing surveys many years ago, and this is before we used Simple Survey, we had 3 faces. We had a sort of a smiley face, an angry face, and what I call the apathetic face. That was the question. It was a similar sort of thing, how did we do, but they got a chance to pick a face. We got, fortunately, lots of happy faces. We got very occasionally an angry face, and we got this confusing in the middle apathetic face quite a few times. And I genuinely didn't understand what that meant. It's sort of, they care enough to click on something, but what is it? It's a sort of a neutral face. We did all right. And for me, that wasn't quite detailed enough. I wasn't getting the real guts of analysis of really understanding how people felt. Since we moved to a 5-star model, and in fact, it was talking through the different options with colleagues of yours at Internet Creations that we sort of arrived on the 5-star model. I find it much more accurate. We get lots of 5s, we get quite a few 4s, and then if something goes badly wrong, generally it's a 1. And so it seems to be much more descriptive than the simple sort of happy, sad, and in the middle face, and allows me to get some decent figures while giving a little bit more flexibility and ability to be descriptive of how we did without going into the depth of actual sort of written responses. I looked to you to see how you were doing things and what your recommendations were at the point at which I started using Simple Survey, because you are the experts in feedback, not me. And that little bit of extra ability to describe how people feel seemed to be a good balance. And as much as I'd love to go into depth of huge questions and multiple question surveys, the practicalities of that for doing on every single case just wouldn't work, and I don't think we'd get the level of responses that I'm sure we'll go on to talk about. And so for me, that was a nice compromise. And looking back on it, it does seem an effective way of doing it. I certainly wouldn't now move anything less descriptive than 5 stars. Over time, would I consider going to perhaps 1 to 10? Maybe. Peter, I don't know if you've got any further thoughts on that. That's not something we've discussed before in detail.
Yeah, to add to that, to your answer, so Daniel's moved to a 5-star rating and what's called a customer satisfaction score, where you rate someone on a scale of 1 to 5. And Simple Survey comes with some different methodologies out of the box. So you can choose a customer satisfaction score of 1 to 5, a net promoter score of 0 to 10, and a thumbs up, thumbs down if you really want to keep it simple, depending on what you're asking. And so each of these methodologies have their time and place. Internet Creations, for example, we use with our support team the net promoter score of 0 to 10, where you ask someone, how likely are you to recommend this person or this service to a friend or colleague? And this is a standard industry type scoring, where based on someone's score of a 0 to a 5, and then a 4 to a 7, and then whether they give a 9 or a 10, it gets ranked and scored differently. And what this allows you to do, though, is then compare yourselves on a sort of an industry standard level, and how you compare to maybe some of your competitors also. And so that's one advantage of using some standard methodologies, which I highly recommend. But it's really a matter of personal choice. in terms of, what level of detail you want to get to, whether it's, a quick, simple thumbs up, thumbs down, a 1 to 5, or use something like Net Promoter Score, which has more variability from, 0 to 10. So any other questions related to customer satisfaction, Anthony?
Yeah, there's one additional question on whether this is targeted to Daniel. Do you track feedback from your customers over a period of time to look for trends for specific contacts or accounts?
Yes, so we analyze the feedback across various different things, certainly across accounts, particularly new clients, and we've been fortunate enough to get a few new clients even over the last few months. So certainly with new accounts, it's something we'll watch very, very carefully to see that the trends are right. We'll also analyze by the type of case that it is. So we categorize our cases, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, whether it's connectivity, whether it's change, and we'll also track feedback on those metrics as well. So it's not just the obvious by account or by contact of that account, but also by the type of case we're dealing with. It's really important to know if we're performing well, maybe on dealing with third parties that we will often do on behalf of our clients, as we are when it's actually us doing the work. So if we're having to deal with internet service providers, that sort of thing, I need to make sure that we're still delivering that level of satisfaction as when we're actually doing the physical work ourselves. Because our clients rely on us to do that, and that reflects effectively the reputation of IT generally for a client will reflect on our reputation too. Does that answer that question, Anthony?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's we're going to be getting later a little bit more on how you take actionable insights, but Daniel's given some great examples of how to look at trends and break down that data, by new customers versus, older customers, or by the different product or service that you're offering, or in solving one type of problem versus another. So I think it's important to, that the devil's in the details in terms of getting into identifying what those trends are and then how you can take action on those. So those are some really good examples. So I'm going to move now next into employees, and we're going to jump into this area of employee feedback. And so at Internet Creations, we firmly believe that employees are the lifeblood of your organization, and the service agents are the soldiers on the front line. And to create a great customer experience really starts with a great employee experience and a great agent experience. And so at Internet Creations, we attack this by doing, well-being check-ins with the employees and a childcare survey. And we do these ongoing tiny pulse questions to get feedback from the employees. And so this really gives us a way to, and what I recommend is really to just listen, learn, and adjust. And so surveys are a great way to do that and capture that information. So Daniel, can you give us some examples of how Lifeline IT uses feedback to coach employees?
Yeah, absolutely. So we analyze all of our surveys by employee or by engineer as well, so we can see how they're doing. We do it in two ways, I think. Generally speaking, on our dashboard, which the whole team have access to, we have almost a leaderboard on feedback. So there's some healthy, friendly competition between all of the engineers to see who has a solid 5 at the end of every week, as opposed to a 4.7 or a 4.8. And that is always done in good spirits. But again, that's very healthy because people are constantly focused on the feedback that they're going to get from the cases that they're working on. When we do get negative feedback, again, because it's coming through in real time, we will have that conversation with the client, find out what went wrong, and are able to then discuss, and we always discuss openly with the engineer involved, look, this is what happened, this is why it happened, this is how the client felt about it. And it's always easier to have a conversation with an employee with specific examples. It's much better to be able to go and say that this is how the client felt about communication in this particular instance. This is how a client felt about the emails that you were sending or the calls that you made, rather than going to someone and generally saying, look, I think you need to improve your conversations a little bit, or I think you need to improve your emails a bit. If we can be really specific, then they can really learn from it. And I've not had a single bad experience going through an actual example with one of my team. It's always easy when there's real information there, and it allows us to have a healthy discussion of what they think they did and how they think together we can move forward, because they know actually the goal is to get that 5-star feedback.
Yeah, so that's really interesting that it sounds like you've created a culture there where it's, and I think, part of being able to coach is creating a culture where that feedback is welcome and where people feel safe discussing the feedback openly with the objective to really learn from it. And I like how you are, not just using it to coach individual employees, but gathering larger insights and provide that as opportunities and teaching moments for the entire team to learn
Yeah, I think,
best practices as well as pitfalls to avoid.
yeah, I think the openness is really important. And the fact that within Salesforce, they can look at any case, they can see the feedback that was given, they can see the conversations that were had throughout that, it puts it into context, which is vital.
Yeah, and you've touched upon an important point of by having it all in Salesforce, it does make that sort of 360-degree view of the customer available to everyone. And and this is important for for all different parts of the organization, whether it's sales, marketing, support, product management, like myself. So those are all things that are critical towards capturing that feedback and making sure that everyone has access to it too,
Yeah,
so
and I
they
think we
can
talk a lot
do their
about
best.
yeah, and I think we talk a lot about sort of the examples of where perhaps there's been negative feedback and it becomes a training moment, but it works the other side as well. And the fact that we're able to sit down with someone and say, look, here's the feedback from this particular client since we last did a review, and sit down with the client, with the engineer, and be able to brag about how great we've done, and actually say, look, we're talking to you, who's the IT contact, or the director, or the business owner, and we know that you're happy, but look, this is your team. This is the actual feedback that you've given to your lead engineer, to your second engineer over the last few months, and actually see the real feedback that's been given is incredibly powerful.
Yeah,
And it's a
and,
great pat on the back of the engineer as well.
yeah, and I love how you're also gamifying it by, I think that creates a little bit more fun and some playfulness, and that's especially needed, I think, now as employees are working remotely, because you don't have that maybe, as much camaraderie and people are dealing with the emotions of being isolated. And by creating some gamification, you make people's jobs a little more fun, and as long as you're doing it in a playful way. How have employees reacted to some of the gamification?
Yeah, they do enjoy it. And in fact, when we first went live a few months back, and we're able to show these things on our dashboards, which are historically were up on big screens in the office, but now are still perhaps in a slightly smaller corner in people's second monitors. It is there visible all the time. And I will quite often get a message through when somebody's overtaken someone else, or when something's gone slightly awry, I'll get a message through very early. So it's been taken really, really well. And there's always people who will be first to sort of stand up and say, look, yet again, I'm 5-star throughout. But no, it's in good spirits, but I think also it's important that people understand that this is real data. It's no one gets to tamper it. Feedback is never ever changed, and keeping that there and being able to sort of have that audit trail, that traceability, means that yes, it is fun conversations, but they know that it's born of serious data from clients as well.
No, that's a good point in terms of making sure that that data is accurate and not being tampered with. Because one of the downsides I've created some gamification in things before, is sometimes people will game the system. And
Yeah.
so you have to be really careful how you set up those gamification rules and make sure you're incentivizing the right behaviors, and not people are just going to gamify it to throw off some metrics and statistics that are being tracked. So some really good and interesting points that I think are very useful to our listeners. So moving on, I'm going to talk a little bit about innovation, one of my favorite topics now. And, you know, a crisis can really expose weaknesses and force you to deal with them. And you can either shy away and wait for the crisis to end in the hope that things are going to return back to the old normal, or you can really embrace the new normal and see this as an opportunity to innovate and come out stronger on the other end. So, Daniel, can you give us examples of how feedback has resulted in, innovation at Lifeline IT?
Yeah, there's one example in particular. When we first moved to remote working, obviously our case numbers went very high, very fast. We had a lot of clients moving large teams from office-based environments to home-based environments, working with different internet connections, perhaps on different equipment. And we were very, very carefully monitoring how that impacted on feedback. And we started to get some negative feedback coming in, and looking into the detail, we could see very quickly that a lot of this was down to the fact that we just couldn't get in touch with the contacts at our clients to talk to them and to try and resolve the problems. And there were lots of unanswered calls, lots of voicemails, and we were really, for a few days, at a loss at how to deal with that. What we did, we've always encouraged clients to report things to us through our portal, which is just a very simple Salesforce customer portal. And we just asked one more question. And the question that we asked is, what is the best number to call you on? So every time anyone logged anything with us, there's one more question: what's the best number to call you on? And as soon as we asked that question, and as soon as we got those contact details back, everything suddenly returned to a little bit more like normal, because we were able to call people and call them perhaps on their mobile number, perhaps on their landline home number. But that changed things. And again, it's just by paying attention and thinking what actually now is very obvious. People aren't going to be on their office number or their DDI. They're going to be somewhere different. It made it easier to communicate, easier to understand. And there's other things that have come from it as well, in terms of working hours and understanding that people's working day changes. But again, just keeping an idea on how people feel and analysing things in different ways, perhaps by hour that cases are coming in and being closed, really, really helped us to move, to adapt quickly.
I love that example because it's something so simple, but it's so pertinent right now. Like, it's so easy to overlook that, and the impact it has of, like, wasting time, not, having effective communication with your customers, and something as simply as, hey, where can I call you now, instead of calling you on your office number where you're obviously no longer working from, is, something simple, but it just shows of, being able to connect the dots. And I think that's a lot of what innovation is about. And so, some examples, for example, at, Internet Creations, is in terms of collecting feedback to drive product innovation, is I think it's also important to take a multi-pronged approach and collect feedback from areas beyond just surveys. So for example, at Internet Creations, we have things like our Inner Circle, which is an invite-only product-specific webinars. We also allow our customers to post ideas on our Salesforce community. We do things like product implementation reviews and let customers schedule one-on-one meetings with us. And then it's get tons of great ideas by being in constant communication with the support team. They really expose to us what kind of challenges customers are facing, and that's super important as a product manager. And then the last thing is, tapping into the collective, experience of the team. And we do that through things like our Innovation Day events. And we just had one recently, actually, and I love it because it includes cross-functional teams from product development, support, and sales, and we brainstorm and collaborate on, innovative solutions to problems. So these are a lot of the ways that, we found it very effective to gather feedback from multiple ways. So moving beyond that, I wanted to get into some tips for how to take actionable insight. And so, what advice do you have Daniel, for our listeners to improve the way they collect feedback?
I think the first thing is you've got to ask the questions. Sometimes it can be really uncomfortable because there is a big fear that the answer may not be the answer that you want, or that you don't know what the answer will be. I've heard so many times, oh, don't ask a question if you don't know what the answer is going to be. I think you have to ask the questions. Much better that you know how they're feeling and are able to take action as a result of that, whether they're feeling great or whether they're not feeling great. Better that you know the answer and then can do something about it than not to understand how they feel. It's so powerful. So absolutely, don't be scared. Ask the question. You can then do something, and you can do something else, and you can do something else. But you've got to ask the question. And then the follow-up from that is you've got to listen to the answers. It's all very well to ask the question and do nothing, but as important as asking how are we doing is then when we hear actually this didn't go the way that we wanted it to, you've got to listen and you've got to respond. I've mentioned real time several times, and for us real time is so important, and it is so powerful to pick up the phone to somebody on the other side of London potentially and say, look, we hear that you weren't happy with the way in which Joe dealt with this. How can we improve this? How can we resolve it? What went wrong? How do we make sure this doesn't happen again? And without exception, we get really good results, a really good conversation coming from that. So those are my biggest tips of all. There's some smaller stuff. Include details in the question. So we're asking on every single case to every single person, how do we do? But it's a little bit more than that. It's Joe closed this case for you today at this time. Put the description or the first line of what the case was about so they understand. That way, if they're getting 3 or 4 different emails asking how we did, they can respond with that information. It's a quick reminder of what it is that they're giving feedback on. That really helps. A lot of tips around analyzing the data, but I don't know if you want to come in on those points first, Peter.
Yeah, well, we'll get into that in a second. So first of all, I love how you're recognizing the human emotion of the fear of asking questions. And you would think that, oh well, what's the harm in asking a question? But it really is a fear that humans have to overact. And I'm reminded of a thing that happened to me at a company I was consulting for and advising for. I actually recommended that they set up an NPS score, and they were like, we've really been thinking about doing this, but we're really afraid what the answers might be. And I'm like, so it's really so I encourage our listeners here the same way you have to go beyond that fear and realize that it's better to know, because then you can take action. And so don't be afraid of the feedback. So I think that was really great advice, and that's a really good tip. And then the rest of it, I think sort of to echo what Daniel was saying is our approach here at Internet Creations is really just to keep surveys simple, friendly, and timely. And just as Daniel mentioned, you want to keep this, by simple we mean keeping them short. So we really recommend keeping them less than 5 questions and maybe only 1 open-ended text question. And by friendly, keep them really personalized, where because you have Salesforce, you can pull in Salesforce information about them and display that on the survey to make it more friendly, make it more personalized. And then by making sure there's only like a 1-click response that works on both mobile and desktop interfaces is also key. And then we've been talking about this a little bit about timely, meaning that send transactional surveys that are sent right after a customer interaction. And so this is what's going to ensure that you have very high response rates. So those are really the biggest tips I have on collecting feedback. So the next question is well, what do you do now that you've collected all this data? That's only one part. How do you now get value out of this feedback? That's another part of the solution. So, Daniel, can you dive a little bit deeper into this and tell us, how do you, once you've collected the feedback, how do you really get meaningful insights out of it so that you know what actions to take and what decisions to make?
Yeah, So we get a lot of data, and again, you touched on this, Peter, but I think we get just over 50% of all the cases we created, we get a feedback score on, which is a huge number. I mean,
That's a great response rate.
Yeah, it's way higher than we've ever had before since we moved to simple survey. And I put that down to the fact that it literally is one click, and that was a big deciding factor for us in choosing your product. And so we have this data, and it is meaningful data, and then it's about slicing and dicing it. And we do the obvious. We look at it by account so that we can see how we're performing for a particular client. We do it by engineers so that we can see how each of those engineers is performing individually and if there's any issues. As I think one of the questioners mentioned before, we look at it over time to see if we're improving, if we're getting worse, or if we're staying roughly the same. But it's also important to look at it by the type of case. And this is where it comes to looking carefully within Salesforce about what information you're collecting around that case, because when you cross-reference that to feedback, you get some really interesting results. Are we getting good feedback on things that we're dealing with internally, but less good feedback perhaps when we're dealing with third parties on clients' behalf? Are we getting good feedback on hardware, but perhaps not on software? Do we need to improve training for our team on certain types of software? So go that little bit further, learn how to do the reports within Salesforce if you don't know already, and start to cross-analyze this data. And again, because Simple Survey allows us to write the results right back into the individual case, rather than looking at it just as a survey result in its own right, it is very, very powerful. And I think also recognize where clients are trying to say thank you. If you're getting a lot of 5-star reviews from someone, pick up the phone, and it enables us to say, look, this particular person we've done a good job for, they're sort of saying thank you to the engineers. Let's feed that back and let's respond to that too. But it's the slicing and dicing, the trends that are really, really helpful.
So that's really interesting because, I think as humans, we collect information and we make, tend to make snap judgments, myself included. And, it sort of reminds me of a scenario where, a couple years back, I was doing some analysis for a company and they assumed one thing, but when you dug into the data, it really showed something else. I'm just sort of curious from your own experiences, were there certain assumptions that you had that then when you looked at the data didn't support it and you realized, oh, wait, I'm glad I have this data and it's changed my mind and my approach?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll give you an example. We've got an engineer who loves getting stuck into the difficult stuff. And the sort of person that
I never heard of an engineer that does that, but go ahead.
no, loves the difficult stuff, very, very tenacious. If there's something which has stumped everyone else, he wants to get stuck in and do that one. Strangely, we found there was a lower feedback score than I would expect. But when you start looking in a little bit more detail, like, okay, did this person open the case? Were they the first engineer involved, or were they just the one who finally cleared it up after it had been sticking around for a few days? And actually, you find that, in fact, that person was perhaps being downgraded a little bit because he was closing it after maybe 2 or 3 days rather than 2 or 3 hours. But in fact, he was jumping in and helping out on other cases. So that's where, exactly as you say, Peter, you've got to look at the data. And you've got to look at what are the other things going on there. It's not as simple as it sometimes seems on the surface.
Yes, that's interesting. So you could have reached the assumption that, oh my God, this guy's so great, he's so thorough, people are just obviously going to love him. And then you can look, at the data too and say, oh, well, he's not getting good ratings, what's, good scores back, what's going on? And so I guess what was learned from that is that customers were looking for a quicker response. And so, maybe there's an opportunity there, and I'm not sure how, you could tell us how you adjusted, but to maybe like, hey, give them a quick response to let them know, what approaches you're taking while this second level engineer, could really get into the details of it and, solve those issues. Is that
You're
sort of how it
absolutely right.
went, or?
Yes, for us, what we learned from that is actually let's escalate faster. So if we've got
Okay.
people like who are able to really get stuck into these difficult things, let's say to the team, look, if there's something that you think is going to be really complex, escalate it fast. Don't sit on it. Don't maybe research it in your own time. Put it out to the team. ask the question on our internal messaging system and say, look, has anyone got any thoughts on this, and escalate things fast.
So that's great. So you're really having the best people, and you're utilizing, people based on what their best skills are. And so
And
that's
again,
that's a good example of using that, and you're only able to figure that out once you look through the data.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to what you were saying about innovating in changing times. Historically, we'd have had a team sitting in the office where they sort of shouted across the desk to each other, and people were overhearing conversations and saying, oh, I've got a thought on that one. Now it's a little bit different because everyone's sitting in their own homes. Encouraging that conversation across different means is challenging, but it's doable.
Yeah, no, those are those are great examples of how you have to adjust, and you can't just go on as business as usual, and why collecting feedback is more important now than ever, so you can make those decisions and make those adjustments.
We have a question about timing. So Daniel, you mentioned that all your work items are cases in Salesforce. What is your recommended timing for when a survey is sent out after a case is closed, and then also the timing for when you might follow up with either coaching or follow up with the customer after the survey is received?
Okay. So in terms, the first question, in terms of when we send out a survey, we've tried two different things on this. We've tried sending the surveys at the end of the day. So we would send out all the surveys at, say, 5 p.m. for the cases that were closed that day. And then what we've now moved to is sending the survey immediately the case is closed. So there is virtually no delay between the case being closed and the survey being sent. And we found we get a better response by doing it immediately because it's fresh in people's minds, and the fact that they can very quickly just say, yes, that's how it was, that's how we feel about it, gives us a fast, accurate, and importantly, it gives us more data. We get better response rates. So I would suggest doing it in real time, which is very easy to do from Salesforce. We use a workflow rule in Salesforce. There's other methods as well, but so I would suggest doing it immediately. It probably won't surprise you to say that in terms of feedback, we try and respond to any negative feedback equally quickly. So it comes through to us, as I mentioned, by email, and then we also get an alert in a channel in Microsoft Teams. And one of the senior management team will quickly tag that and say, okay, I've got this, I'll make a call. And we'll try and respond to negative feedback normally within an hour or so of receiving it. That's not always practical if it's out of office hours or people aren't contactable, but we'll generally try and pick up the phone and resolve it fast. Certainly within one working day, but ideally much quicker than that.
Cool. And I wanted to emphasize one thing you pointed out, which is not just do you get a better response rate when the survey is sent out sooner, but you got to realize you're actually going to get more accurate results. Because if you're sending that survey out 3-4 hours later or a couple of days later, odds are, people are in a different mood. They're in a different state of mind. They don't remember exactly how that experience went. So it could also impact the accuracy of the data you're collecting. So I just wanted to highlight that point because I thought that was a key thing that you touched upon in answering that question. Anthony, do we have any other questions, or would anyone else please feel free to submit any additional questions you have at this point?
Yeah, we have a couple more questions. So one question is, what are your thoughts on sending periodic surveys in addition to surveys when cases are closed? And Peter, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think they're relationship or engagement surveys. Is that the right?
Yeah,
terminal?
I mean, so you can send it out where you want to send out a set of surveys to customers at specific times. Like thinking through, Anthony's, Daniel's example, he was talking about like with new customers. And so you could, for example, as you're onboarding a new customer at different stages in their, onboarding, send out more general type surveys to see how they are going, maybe through that process versus it being after a specific, closing of a case. So that would be an example where I would think it would make sense to send customers those types of surveys. I'm not sure though overall about the effectiveness of those. They're just like randomly blasting your clients and just say, hey, once a quarter we send out this quarterly survey. I'm not sure how effective that is. Do you have any insights or thoughts, or have you done that type of surveying, Daniel, and can share some of your insights on that?
That's not something we've done. What we do with our clients is we'll tend to have a quarterly or a 6-monthly review, and it's much more of a conversation rather than sort of a survey being sent. I think what we're looking at doing is a survey, a simple survey, certainly after a particular event. We haven't as yet, but I very much want to start doing surveys during the onboarding process. I think that's important. The other thing that I'm looking to bring surveying in, certainly in the next quarter, is after we do a maintenance job at our clients. We do regular maintenance, and it's something which sort of goes a little bit, is a bit invisible for our clients. They don't see the value of the maintenance. They don't see all the things we're doing behind the scenes. And I want to try and introduce some perception of value around that by asking them how they feel about the maintenance that we've done, and the interaction around that. So that I think is something I would certainly look at.
Yeah, so those are some good examples of where you can, create survey programs well beyond just cases. I mean, we've talked about this a lot internally about how you can do them as part of the sales and marketing process, either after a webinar or after a sales call or after, winning or losing a sale to collect valuable feedback, or do it during account renewal process, maybe after an account is renewed to find out, why they stayed with you, or if you lost that account, why you lost them. Was it pricing? Was it competition? Was it they found some other way to address their problem? And so, we really recommend when you think about your surveys, think about creating these programs that walk through the entire customer journey and the customer life cycle and identify what points on that journey you want to collect the feedback, is my advice.
And Daniel, have you ever experienced a situation where a client essentially submitted a new support case in the comments of a survey where they introduce, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, so what we, it's rare, but what we've had is where someone will try to reply to the survey email with a set of questions. It does happen, and we'll build a process around that where effectively we just log that as a new case. But it's more that they will reply to the survey email than actually sort of try and put it into comments. And again, I think what we do when we send out an email, and it's a policy within our business, we don't use any sort of group emails, so we don't have sort of sales or tech or anything like that. It will always come from a person. So our survey emails come from me, and so they tend to land on my desk, and I'll get occasionally a new case that's logged by replying to that survey email. I guess that's the price we pay for asking the question from time to time, but it's not generally the way it's done.
That's an
There's
interesting
another question about incentives. And I know you were talking about gamification earlier, and you also mentioned that there is a 50% response rate on surveys. Have you ever considered offering a prize to incentivize even more response rates?
I haven't actually, and I think it's possibly because I've always been pleased with the level of response that we have. Historically, using previous products, we've been around the 30% mark. Since we moved across to Simple Survey, it very quickly jumped to 50% plus, and I'm happy with that. I think that's about right. I don't want people sort of mindlessly just clicking, and for me, 50% is certainly above the average from the research I've done, and I haven't felt the need to sort of boost it beyond that. And again, I think getting it into proportion, I want people to consistently give me feedback, whether it's good or whether they have concerns. And I want it to be because they want to tell us how we're doing, not because I want them to get anything out of it. I think if I was struggling to get results, or if I was asking someone to participate in something maybe with a little bit more depth, then I might do that. Maybe if I was doing it around maintenance, which happens less frequently, and where I might like a little bit more detail back, then I'd consider that. And again, so far, I haven't incentivized our team on feedback, partly because there's quite a few who are all on 5 stars, so it'd be difficult to split it up. But I think the gamification, I like that term, Peter, is in and of itself is something which people are mindful of and which drives people forward.
Yeah, and to add to Daniel's point on that, I've done some research into this area, and studies have actually shown that the recognition actually has more weight amongst the employees than financial incentive, often with these gamification models.
Okay, and Peter, we're just at the hour mark, so if you wanted to wrap up with a closing thought.
So to wrap things up, thank you so much for the great questions. Thank you for everyone's participation. If you guys actually want to see what Simple Survey looks like and what that experience is like, go to icforce.com/take-a-survey and tell us what you think. And so again, I really just want to thank Daniel so much for joining us, and want to thank everyone here for attending. Feel free to reach out to us here at Internet Creations, and go check out Simple Survey and let us know if you have any questions. We really appreciate your taking time out of your day.